Do you think voting at the local, state, and federal level matters? Do you think it matters? Do you think your individual vote matters?
Yes.
Good. Is everybody here registered?
Yes.
Okay. So participating in the voting process gives all Americans, if you're registered as an American, if you're a citizen, it gives all of us a chance to express our preferences for certain political candidates and also to express our opinions on certain public policy issues that may be important to us in our lives. So in the 2020 presidential election, 66% of the eligible voters in this country voted. That was the highest turnout in 3 decades. Usually it's lower than that. And you have to wonder, well, where are the other 34%? Why are they not voting? This is important. So despite having the opportunity or the right to express our preferences by voting, many Americans don't participate in elections, especially the local and state elections. The turnout is much, much lower. So we may think that our vote won't actually affect the outcome of any election, because after all, it's just one vote. But we know as Dharma practitioners, we're encouraged to cultivate even tiny little virtues all day long and avoid even tiny little non-virtues all day long, because they add up. They add up like drops in a bucket. And so our votes can be like drops in a bucket that we're bringing together to make a significant difference. Water has power when it's collected together, right? We know that. And the same is true of our votes. Or we might think that there won't be any tangible benefit for us if our candidate wins the election. But who we vote for can drastically alter the shape of our country, as we see in this upcoming election. Or for some, there's a really high cost involved with voting. Like it takes a lot of time and energy to research all the issues and to research the candidates to find out who to vote for. It takes, I notice we all sit around the voting magazine booklet before the local elections because we're not that familiar or not that involved. But also there can be a high cost for some people to take time off work and to travel across town to place their vote, especially in local elections. Luckily, more and more states are going to mail in ballots for the federal elections. We may not regard voting as a civic duty, or maybe I should ask you, do you regard voting as part of your civic duty?
Yes.
Yay, I'm preaching to the choir. It's a critical part, isn't it? It's a key element of our democratic process. And I found a beautiful quote by the late civil rights champion, U.S. Representative John Lewis, who said, "The vote is precious. It's almost sacred. It's the most powerful, nonviolent tool we have in a democracy." And as Buddhists, we are all for nonviolence and compassion. So voting can actually change our way of life. In a democracy, we get to say what's important to us through our vote. The policies shaped by the people we elect do affect our lives in small and big ways. We all pay taxes, and so voting is a way for us to ensure that our tax money is used in a responsible and efficient way by voting. And rights such as voting are not necessarily guaranteed. We might think they are. We might want them to be. But think about how many laws have been passed just in the last few years that have chipped away at our right to vote. There have been many attacks on voting equity, including voting restrictions, gerrymandering, misinformation, and election intimidation. That's probably happened throughout our entire, some of that to some degree has happened throughout our entire development as a country, but it seems to be becoming more prominent. So voting is a critical right that all of us must protect, and that begins by exercising our right to vote in elections at every level of government. Have you ever thought of voting as part of your Dharma practice? As part of a way to benefit others? As a way to accumulate a lot of merit, actually. When I first moved to the Abbey, Venerable Tenzin was teaching Precious Garland of advice to a king by Nagarjuna. And Nagarjuna gives practical advice on how a leader should rule. And so there's a very extensive section, maybe 30 or 40 verses, where he advises the king to think big, really think big about how to benefit others, to reign ethically according to the Dharma, to help others equally without partiality, to practice a lot of generosity. That's a very easy, non-sectarian way to help others, providing what they need. I remember there were some verses about advising him to leave things like cloth and needle and thread at places where travelers might come across them in case they needed them. Also, he advised him to help others equally without partiality. Also, to find mature, qualified ethical ministers to carry out his work. People who were kind to the sick, the blind, the downtrodden, the disabled, the homeless, those who were hungry and thirsty, and foreigners. He also advised him to deal fairly and compassionately with those who break the law. So we need to have justice as part of our a leader's qualities. And then also to appoint courageous generals who would do whatever is possible to avoid violent confrontation, to exhaust all possible means of dialogue before engaging in battle. So although we're not kings ourselves, and to date, America is not ruled by a king. It's ruled by an elected presidential figure. But just as Nagarjuna advised the king to take his duties seriously, I think we as Dharma practitioners should take our duty to vote seriously, because they're going to have our vote. Our collective vote will have very far-reaching impact, not only on ourselves, not only on our own communities and our states in the U.S., but also abroad as well. Our country and what we do here impacts other countries very much so. So if we go to the voting polls with a Dharma motivation, thinking about loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta, really wishing to benefit others, we will reap the karmic rewards of that. As we've seen with all of our actions, it depends on our motivation for doing it. So we'll reap those karmic rewards individually as well as collectively. And even if we don't agree with all the policies that the candidates we vote for propose, there are different ways that we can work around those ethically. For instance, some people prefer not to support any of the military spending in the country. That's fine. When you send in your IRS tax at the end of the year or in April, just send a little note along that says, I'd like this to go towards social services or education, or earmark it for whatever you think is important. So we can do things like that, or just mentally think, I don't want any of this money, this tax money, to go towards any departments that would harm others. So just in case there's anyone here in this room or anyone watching online who has not yet registered to vote, I will include a link where you can easily register to vote online. It's easy. It only takes 5-10 minutes. As long as you're a citizen of the United States, you're a resident of here, you're a resident of Washington, you're 18 years old, and you haven't been disqualified by any kind of court order, and you're not currently serving a time for a felony that you've created, you're eligible to vote. So please, vote. Also, in case you're not sure if you're registered to vote, maybe you haven't voted in many elections recently and you're not sure it's you're current, you can confirm your registration status for the election in November by just checking a simple link, which I will also include in the description to this video. So I don't know, how many days are there? 85, 86 days left before the November election. And so remember that voting is a privilege, it's a right, and then it's a great opportunity. So let's do it with a good motivation.
Elections, there was one vote that separated two of the candidates. Just in case we think that our vote doesn't matter, this was a very close primary election. Both of the candidates will move on to the November election, but it was just really striking to see that it can really come down to the wire like that.
I wanted to add, it was very helpful for me to watch documentaries about how the right to vote was earned. As a community, we watched one about the women who fought so hard for the right for women to vote, including like going on hunger strikes. Or we watched one about was it about the civil rights movement? And, you know, people died for the right to vote as people of color. Or just learning about how in like Sierra Leone, the first time they tried to have democratic elections, so many people were illiterate, so you had to vote with a handprint. So the military went around cutting off people's hands. So, you know, it is really not to be taken for granted. And for me, growing up in a country that was single-party state for much of my teenage life, I actually never thought I would get to vote. And I was amazed that I did. So it's such a precious, I just cannot believe you would give that up, the right to vote.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you.